Welcome to the latest edition of the Audit Opinion. I'm delighted to be sitting with you here today to talk about audit methodology. For those who don't already know you, would you mind introducing yourself briefly?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Kati Barnhill, and I am a principal at Pinion. I live in Kansas City. We are a firm of about 600 folks, and we have about 200 in our audit department. We're an ag specialized firm, and then kind of all of the ancillary businesses and industries that agriculture touches. And my role, particularly in the firm, is A&A innovation leader and technology leader. And so I really help our A&A director and other leaders in the firm think about the technology stack, the methodology that we're using, and how we can kind of automate as much as we can and integrate that technology stack into our everyday work.
I'm excited to talk to you today about audit methodology, and you've been talking about how to go about selecting an audit methodology, a process that's very recent in memory for you and the change that you're going through at the moment. Talk to me though a little bit, start with how you got into the role that you're currently doing. It's a unique role, one that we don't necessarily see in every CPA firm. So how did you get into this role?
Yeah, our firm had gone through a merger just a couple of years ago. And at that point, our A&A director was retiring. And so they had reached out and said, hey, we want to kind of get a leadership stack in the A&A function. And we have particular roles that we'd like each of you to take on. And so the CEO of our company had said, hey, we think we need an innovation and digital transformation A&A leader that we want you to focus on. And so it was really brought to me and said, make the role what you want. It's not been done before in the firm, so it's really success is what you make it. And so I was really passionate about what technology we were using at the time and how we could use something new and different, and what was new and different out in the market. A couple of years ago, there was a number of players in the field, Inflow included, and a few others that we were really excited to learn more about. And so that was really where I found a lot of passion.
And is that a dedicated role then? Are you spending 100% of your time on audit innovation, or do you have clients that you're balancing as well, Katie?
Yes, I do have a number of clients as well. So that's really important for me when rolling out a new methodology and different tools that we have. It's really important to me to be a boots on the ground person and use the tools that we are implementing in everyday work. So that way I can see, hey, this one is successful, or this one needs a little bit of work, or we need to switch this one out. So it's really important to me to continue to have client work so that way I can make sure I'm intimately familiar with the tools.
What does that split look like then between client work and the innovation efforts?
I would say it's about 75%, 25%, 75% innovation and other just leadership, QM work throughout the firm, and then 25% client work. But that skews a little bit during busy season.
Understandably. So
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting take on it though, because I think having people who are really focused on innovation is critical at a business level. We often see firms will have CIOs, and that's such an important role, but they're so reliant then on somebody in the audit department, in the tax department, to be able to support their endeavors. And if they're basically trying to fight the client workload to get people's time and attention, that can be a real barrier for CIOs. So having somebody in the audit team and the tax team who's actually got a significant proportion of their portfolio to help not just evaluate the tools that are out there, but actually then help to implement and deal with the change management. That must be a very important role and one of the keys to successful implementations at Pinion.
Yeah, for sure. It really helps being in the client-facing role to roll these tools out. Yes, we have a CIO at the firm, and his role is very important, but he's not a CPA. And so it really brings another layer to say, these are the nuances of our projects. These are the nuances of our client base. So we need to make sure that we have somebody in the room who can bring that perspective when we're looking at, automations, technology, that type of thing.
So let's dig into then the process that you've gone through to select a new audit methodology, inherently a new audit technology as well. Talk to me about how that process started. What were some of the things that caused you to go, hey, now is the time that we want to go out and start looking at what might be out there?
Yeah, honestly, it was coming to Engage just a couple of years ago, hearing about all of the different technology and methodology leaders that were emerging at the time. And so about 18 months ago, our CEO reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm hearing a lot of buzz about different methodologies. What are your takes?" Well, at that point, I hadn't done a lot of research, and so I knew I needed to go out and meet with some vendors, look at some demos, and decide from there. And so the process really started with our A&A leadership team met in person again about 18 months ago, and we said, "Hey, aside from the methodology we're on now, what are our dream features? If we said the sky's the limit, what would we want in a software and a methodology?" So we put those ideas on paper. What are our deal breakers? If a methodology or a software doesn't have XYZ, we're out. So we put those on paper. And then basically went from there and booked a number of demos with a number of folks and said, "Hey, we need to keep in mind our dream features and our deal breakers. Some of this stuff is shiny and new and fancy, but does it meet those two criteria or all of those criteria that we set out?"
So you effectively spent time before you started engaging with vendors, doing demonstrations. You actually met as a team and started to gather your requirements, to use more of a technical term. So you sat there and you went, we don't need to maybe capture in detail everything that this needs to do, but here's the things that would really wow us, the dream features as you call them, but also here's the table stakes. If they don't have these things, these are deal breakers. So could you talk to me about how you went through that process as an internal team? What did that look like? Was that just a couple of internal meetings where you just talked that out as a group? Who did you involve in those conversations? Give a bit of color to that.
Yeah, so we have an annual meeting kind of as an A&A leadership team. That includes our director, myself, our quality management, and then a few others that are on our designated A&A committee. We met together in person and spent an entire day with the preface that, guys, this is what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
And the reason we wanted to set out and put those ideas on paper of our dream features and our deal breakers before we sat through demos, we didn't want to be jaded. We didn't want to have that bias already of, well, I already know that this vendor or this methodology has this really cool feature, so I'm going to put that on my list.
Yeah.
And so that really gave us an open mind and really fresh ideas of what we wanted to seek out in a methodology. And so coming together in person was really critical for us because you can read the room a little bit better. You can bounce ideas off of each other a little bit better. And like I say, really taking and setting aside an entire day to focus on that when it's such a big, crucial decision for the firm was really beneficial.
I think that's a really top tip for anyone thinking about this process because, as you say, too many firms start with the product demos and they'll go and look at 2 or 3, 4 tools. They'll see the harbor tour demo, as we call it, because they don't really know what they're looking for. They're just rummaging around the market effectively. And then from there, humans naturally start to bias towards, oh, well, I like that one and I like that one. And then all of a sudden the requirements start to take the shape of one of the tools that there's inherent in that bias towards. So I love the unbiased approach of sitting down before you even see anything and going, what are our requirements here? What are the critical items? I think one thing I've seen other firms do as well that I think would be highly complementary here is going and actually running some workshops with their team members and saying, hey, let's put some of our managers in a room and start to understand, well, what are some of the pain points that we're really experiencing right now with our audit methodology? What do we want to try and fix with this change? And doing that as well with some of the more junior team members, because often we see as leaders, it's been a while since we did some of those really kind of granular tasks, right? Like, don't know how many years it is since I did a bank rec test, for example, and actually getting their real life experience, especially coming straight out of busy season, for example, is a really good way of trying to get different layers and different levels of what's actually the solution we're looking for here. What is it that we're trying to solve? So,
yeah, I like that tip a lot. I really think once we started going through the pilot process, we involved folks at that more junior level. And like you said, they're the ones clicking around. They're the ones interviewing the clients. They're the ones documenting everything. So their perspective is a lot more valuable, I think, than folks give them credit for. And so had we had the opportunity to do that going back, that is something that I would change and get a little bit more insight into what are their pain points in everyday work.
and it's also really, really helpful from a change management perspective. We'll get to that later on, but what you can then do is if you've captured, and I love the fact you reiterated twice there that you documented this, right? This wasn't just a loose conversation. We've documented what did we talk about, what was it we're looking for, etc. If you can do the same with your manager peer group, your seniors, your juniors, you can then use those insights to then play back as part of the implementation approach. You say, oh, remember the 3 or 5 things that you really hated about the current approach? Right, well, here's how this new approach solves those. And so that can be a really powerful way of trying to tailor your communication when it gets to the implementation stage, to say, hey, like as audit leaders, we're really excited about these things, but actually those things might not be relevant to the junior team members. You've got to try and explain to them why it matters to them, and capturing their involvement at the very early stages can be really helpful for that.
Certainly, yeah. And I think we've seen that, honestly, from doing the pilot programs with those junior staff and getting their feedback. We have so many more folks on board now that we've rolled it out firm-wide, our adoption. We've got a lot of folks that are really excited in the room. And it starts with that junior staff. When I'm a higher level person and I have my staff really excited to work on my job because of the new software, that makes the job inherently more enjoyable for everybody. So I think involving them early on is really crucial.
I think that's becoming even more important with the wave of AI momentum and all the noise and rhetoric around that. I think actually making sure that your team members are excited to implement the technology, they really want to be part of that and change, so important. Once you captured your requirements, then what did you do next? What did the process look like for you? And did you, as part of that early stage, agree as a team what that process was going to look like that you were going to go through?
Yeah, we actually laid it out really well. We set a timeline and said, by XYZ date, we want to have demos booked. So when I say demo, that's just meeting with the vendors to visually go through what the software and methodology looks like. And so we all agreed in the room that we were going to sit down with 6 different vendors, do demos. And we also, at that point, decided on the team members of who would sit through the demos. It was going to be more than those 8 or 9 individuals that were in the room. And some of them we would break up, into smaller teams if we needed to, and record those sessions. That way everybody could look and see where we wanted to go. And so once we sat through the demos with all of the vendors, we then decided, okay, we need to narrow this down to 2 and do full-blown pilots. And so when I say pilot, I mean we are reworking completed engagements. And so really, as I mentioned, we also looked at the team members of who do we want to have in the pilot programs. This is a time commitment when we are asking these folks to rework engagements that they've already done. And so we wanted to be very strategic about who we invited into that conversation, and then make sure that each of those teams not only had folks that we knew would be excited, but maybe some of those that we knew may be a little bit stick in the mud of, hey, I know this particular person doesn't really like change, or they're really, they like our current methodology. Let's invite 1 or 2 of those folks. That way if we can get them on board with however we go about this process and decide of our change, if we can get them on board, we can pretty well get most of the firm on board. So those were kind of the things that we decided was timeline of when we wanted to have the demos, when we wanted to do the pilots, and then team members for the pilots.
I love that. There's a couple of really good tips there around. Firstly, before you get to demos, really agreeing what that process looks like. I see a lot of firms get to the end of the process and they don't really know, well, how are we actually going to make this decision? What is it we kind of are judging this based on? Because they got too quickly to the demos, and kind of from the demos, things kind of ramp in a certain direction. So being very deliberate and intentional to lay out, this is the process that we want to follow. I love the fact that you've gone, and these are the team members that we want to involve in the different aspects of this. Because the reality is this is quite a big decision. You're going to have lots of stakeholders. Some people are going to be highly opinionated. Some people are used to it being their decision on these kind of things. And you've got to be clear on who is actually making the decision here. Who's being invited to share their opinions on things. But where does the buck stop in terms of actually making this decision, and how are we going to do that? And I think if you do that at the start, then you've got clarity where everybody knows, right, well, this is how this is how it's going to play out. This is my involvement. This is what I can do, but this is what I can't do. And if you don't have that, you end up with a lot of politicking towards the end, where people have their favorite tool and they're going to try and throw their weight around. And having clarity up front and structure, I think, is key to being clear at the end why you made a decision and which one it is you picked.
Certainly, yeah. I think that's really important to remember, that who are the decision makers, and those junior staff that are involved with feedback and doing the pilots, their voice matters, but they're not necessarily the decision makers. And so I think it's important to nuance, hey, your feedback's important, we will listen, but ultimately we wanted XYZ folks in the room for the decision.
And sometimes you need to break up that decision as well. So we've seen some firms using more of a work streams based approach to recognize, well, yes, we're considering methodology, but there's so many different components to that, because methodology inherently comes with the technology. So who's going to look at the technology side of things? Okay, so maybe that's two different people, one person for methodology, one person for the technology. And then you start to peel away at that and go, well, actually, like, there's a load of work we need to do on IT security and data privacy, right? Well, is that the same person, or is that somebody else? And so you kind of end up, if you don't have some structure to this, having the wrong people in the room for a very technical area. And so trying to just think through, well, what actually are the different things that we need to make this decision based on? Because hell, we could find the best methodology in the world, but if it's actually loaded into a really dated piece of technology, is that going to impact our decision? And hey, if the security on this is really bad, like, surely that's going to impact things. So how can you try and think about those things? Is that something you thought about as part of your process?
Yeah, it was actually really important for us not only to include junior staff, senior staff in our audit department, but we also included our IT folks to say, hey, we have single sign-on requirements. We have all of these privacy and data requirements. So we need an IT person in the room. And then we also had some of our innovation department. So we have a department of folks that are there to build APIs, automate things. They're not accountants, and they're there to solve our everyday menial tasks. So we also wanted to invite one of those folks to say, hey, these providers are now opening up their APIs. We want several automations in our dream features. That was some of our dream features, is open APIs to connect a number of our other softwares. And so we also wanted to invite one of those folks into the room to say, what's your opinion? Does the vendor say, yeah, we have open APIs, but what does that really mean? I'm not an API builder. I don't know. So we need to make sure that we had all of those folks in the room. We also included a tax person. And so that was really crucial as well, to say, hey, we might be separate functions. What our legacy software is now, we're all together. Tax and A&A are together. But going forward, we might be split apart. And we need to do what's important for our audit department, but it's also important to get the tax folks' perspective of what's their timeline. Are they also going through digital transformation, software transformation? Can we kind of code together, go together, or do we need to separate our ways?
I think that's a really astute observation from you there around almost the other people who are impacted by the audit technology changing. It impacts a number of other workflows, but it also impacts specifically your tax colleagues. And I think for too long now in this profession, audit and tax people have been forced to use the same platform and kind of one of you compromise on that. Hey, which one of us is going to take the platform that isn't really built for us, but means that we get to use the same one? Or you've got really clunky workflows where, well, how do you get the trial balance out of my audit tool into your tax tool? But what we're seeing now, we're working with some others in the tax space to really try and create that integrated experience where, hey, the audit people want to pick the best audit platform. The tax people want to pick the best tax platform. And how do we make sure that they don't lose some of those synergies that they might have currently in a combined solution? So really astute to bring them into the process as well. So they're not kind of notified at the end, oh, by the way, guys, we're breaking everything by changing the audit platform. So good luck.
Right.
To actually involve them in that process so they feel like they're heard and they're actually part of the decision.
Yeah. And it was really, like you said, important. We share work across the functions, across tax and A&A. So just because we want to, like you mentioned, we want to choose the best platform for our function. They want to choose the best platform, but we do still need to work together for good client service, because ultimately the client is still centralized and the focus of our firm. And so we want to make sure that we give the client a good experience, and we're not asking for something for the audit and then the tax folks are also asking for the same thing, because we don't talk to each other. We don't want our clients to think that. And so we still wanted to make sure that we involved them in the process. That way they had an understanding of, okay, maybe we're not going to do the same thing anymore, but how do we continue to share that information?
So you talked about narrowing the field down from 6 to 2. So could you briefly share, like, how did you get from the 6 to picking the 2 that you wanted to spend more time exploring?
Yeah, we also at the kind of onset of our in-person meeting to set out the timeline and things, we also decided on other criteria that we would rate the demos on. And a lot of that followed our dream features and our deal breakers. So we built those into kind of a tool to say, hey, we said this needed to be cloud-based. So is that criteria met? Yes or no? And then each of those demo team members filled the evaluation out as we went along through the different demos. And so basically after that, we looked through the feedback and said, hey, there are 2 clear front runners. The decision wasn't too hard to narrow it down to 2. And so then we decided, okay, let's go to the next step and do our pilots.
So it had some science to it in the sense that there was some scoring, there was some cards that you were asking people who were part of the demos to give some analysis of, and then you could take a step back and go, right, okay, based on that, for you, you had 2 clear front runners. It's a no-brainer. We'll go to 2. You're really trying to get from 6 to 2 or 3, I would say, is probably your kind of, but if you've got a clear delineation, take the 2. Take the 2 and move forward, because you want to spend more time really getting into the detail. And so you can't do that with 6. It's not realistic. So you talked then about replaying completed engagements as being part of the next step. I call that a simulation, but I love the terminology around how do we take something we've already done and then bring it into these tools to go from demo land, where, to be quite frank, if it doesn't work in demo land, you really need to run for the hills,
right,
to actually trying to get it, your clients, your particular circumstances into the tool. So how did you approach that part of the evaluation?
Yeah, we thought that it was really crucial. First of all, we had the time that and had the benefit that we could take the time to do a full pilot. Some firms, as you know, they're in a little bit tighter situation. They're being forced off of their platforms. They might not have that luxury. So we are fortunate enough that we did. And so we thought at that point we needed to be strategic about what projects and client teams we were picking. We don't want vanilla. We don't want things that, when you see the demo, it's all perfect. Everything ties out. It's beautiful.
If it doesn't, as they run for the hills.
Yes.
Because if you can't get it to work in demo land, then whoa.
Right. And so we wanted our real live clients. We wanted some that were complex entities. We wanted some that were multiple entities. We wanted some that were messy. And so we decided to have 6 different engagements with different teams. Again, we also looked to add different industries and kind of what tools those teams were using. Were they using our data analytics tool already? If so, it's crucial we get them in the room, because we wanted to look at more data analytics tools. And so we sat down and did 6. As I mentioned, we did them over 2 months, kind of did them back to back, did one vendor for 1 month and then one vendor the second month. That way everything was kind of fresh in your mind, and really made sure that we had that same criteria that our leadership kind of looked at for the demos. We had this pilot teams go through the same criteria, do the same ratings as they went through the pilot programs.
So did you use the same team members then for 1 month and then the next month? So you had consistency and the same clients that you were replaying? So, okay, so consistency across the 2 simulations, which I think is really important for an apples to apples comparison. And I like the fact that you've picked different clients. I would always advocate, try and make sure it's a representative of your client portfolio. I see some firms who basically go, let's pick the 6 hardest jobs we've got. And go, well, that's great, because you might pick the best tool for those 6 hardest jobs, but the other 95% of your client work, that might not be the right tool for those. So make sure it's representative of the client base, I would say. But industries is important. Multiple entities is important. There's a lot of kind of nuance once you get outside of the corporate US gas audit into, okay, so how does it work for this industry niche, or how does it work for this type of engagement? So making sure your simulation is representative of that, I think, is a really important part of the process.
Yeah. And it was like you had mentioned, going back to back, doing them back to back was really important, because we wanted to make a decision relatively quickly. We wanted to move forward with something new. And so doing them back to back really allowed us to do that. And like I mentioned, it was really helpful to have the same criteria that those folks are evaluating that our earlier team also evaluated.
And this simulation process, I think you can scale it up or scale it down depending on, you mentioned the timetable urgency you've got or the criteria you're looking at. We've seen some firms, they can crash course it in 1 week and look at 2 tools.
Right.
You could take a longer process, but one of the keys to that is don't replay the entire engagement. That's just tiresome for the team, to be quite frank. Anyway, we promote an approach where you take the specific jobs to be done in an audit and say, okay, right, let's go and set materiality. What does that look like in each of the tools? Let's go and make sure we're doing the understanding the entity process. What does that look in each of the tools? And if you can pick, as you've talked about, the dream features and the must-haves kind of feed into this jobs to be done approach, because you go, right, well, we know these tools have it in the demo, so let's go and actually work it through. But you can probably get away with doing 30 to 40 tasks on an audit and get an immediate feel for how it's going to work on each of the tools. So anyone sat there thinking, oh, well, it's going to take ages to replay an entire engagement. No, you can be quite selective and quite targeted in this simulation approach to get a really clear feel for exactly how it's going to work without having to tell the team, hey, you know that audit you just completed? Could you redo the entire thing?
Right. And that's honestly what we really did, was looked at specifically understanding the entity. Where do you document walkthroughs? How are you doing risk assessment? You're obviously not going to re-prepare the financial statements. You're not going to need to go to the client and ask questions because you're missing information. You don't need to do any of those aspects. So it might seem onerous to redo a project, but you're not totally redoing it. And then the other thing that we really had to think about as well is this is a time commitment for these folks. They're also serving clients. And we wanted to make sure that it was reflected in our KPIs that these folks are really making a commitment to the firm and the future of our A&A department. And so what we did was we, in our timekeeping system, made a chargeable code that we had folks key their time to. So they still got charge hours for working on these pilots. And so that was really crucial. We didn't want their dashboards and KPIs to suffer because they were making this commitment to the firm. And so that was another thing that I think going back and looking at the process was really beneficial. And I'm really glad that we went about doing that. Even though our CFO was, saying, hey guys, are you sure you really need to do this? We're going to have to finagle things on the back end. But again, we wanted to make sure that these people got recognized for making the commitment.
It's come up a few times in conversations over the last week or so, and it's one of those kind of technical points of detail that might feel really unimportant when you're a partner trying to think about a change program. But those are the sort of things that prohibit people from really engaging and participating in something as important as this. So I've also seen it to the level of, you talked about how 75% of your role is on audit innovation. I'm a big believer that if you're going to run a change management program like changing your audit methodology, you're going to want to have some people who are really focused on that, dedicated to that. I've seen some of the best examples of this have been taking a manager or somebody who is even just a passionate senior and saying, you know what, I'm going to take you off the client work and I want you to focus on making this happen. And there's been some really good examples where we've been doing this for 10 years now. 9 years ago, one of our earliest adopters took one of their best people off client work. And the big debate was, is that going to end her career because she's now not got clients? And she has fast tracked to be one of the youngest partner in that firm ever, because she went from working on 20 or so clients a year to actually impacting and benefit the entire client base. And what she learned and the skills she adopted and the change she enabled meant that she just became so more valuable to the firm than she could have done servicing 20 clients. So it feels scary for the individual if you're painting them into a corner where their career path is questioned. I think trying to make it clear that innovation is so important, because actually you're impacting all of our clients, not just a small portfolio. I see that as being a key driver of successful change management, because you want to take one of your best people and get them really involved with this.
Yeah, and that's honestly, Mark, what we tried to do was take some of our best people, and like I mentioned as well, some of those sticks in the mud, they're high performers, but they don't like change. So if we can get those folks on board, we're going to be really successful. And I also think that the way that we framed it to those folks of, guys, how long have we been on our current methodology? 15 years? This will maybe not happen again in your career. So this is a huge impact on the firm and a huge commitment, and something that, again, could be once in a career or once in a lifetime opportunity to have a voice in the room to say, yes, I pick this particular methodology for our firm for whatever reason. And so I think framing it in that sense, we had folks that were super, super excited and very on board with doing the pilot program, because there were some skeptics in the room that said, guys, are you sure people are really going to want to take the time to do this? And my first thought was, why wouldn't they? I mean, this again is something that's so impactful to you and all of the peers that you work with. I don't know why you wouldn't want your voice to be heard.
I completely agree. And what you've got in the market right now in the audit methodology space is you've got a couple of the incumbents that, one of those methodologies was written in the 1980s, for God's sake, is older than I am. And then you've got newer, more innovative approaches in the market, which I think are critical to being able to really capitalize on AI, data, automation, etc. So you've got something that maybe historically 5 years ago, people would be going, well, I'd be comparing one versus another. They're both really old. How different are these checklists?
Right.
Does it really make any sense to change this? And now what you've got is, yes, you've got those two legacy staples. And for some firms, that's a really great approach. And they continue to stick with the checklist-based approach. But for others, they're craving something that's different, that's more modern, that's more data-driven. I think you talked earlier about colorful, just
Yes.
interesting to look at. And so how can you try to evaluate those different methodologies without getting your hands on them, without getting people involved in it? And I think it's a unique opportunity for them to think about this as a generational change, right? We've been on these methodologies that are checklist oriented for a long time. Is that really what we want our people to be filling in or automatically being filled in the future? Or is this an opportunity for us to think a bit differently about what the audit actually represents? And for me, methodology is one of the key drivers of changing how we do audits.
Yeah. And honestly, we have firm-wide goals that we are going to, increase productivity by X, Y, Z amount with the same amount of folks that we have now. And so in order to do that, we had to change. We have to do less checklist-based work for our particular firm and our particular client base. And so it's exactly what you said, Mark, of we were craving something different. And it's funny that you said, checklists, that was one of our deal breakers is excessive checklists, that was something that if it has that, that's something that we're going to say no automatically to. And so, like you said, those might be the right solutions for some firms and some firms' client base, but ours particularly and our firm-wide goals and culture of automation and doing things differently and digital transformation being at the forefront, it was crucial that we pick something different and do things differently.
I love that about your process because I knew your firm well enough to know that there was a central North Star in terms of a metric that really drove a lot of this. And it was really helpful to be able to then know, well, if that's the North Star, we've got to be able to explain how we can help with that. And so actually that transparency from yourselves, you shared with us some of those requirements. You shared with us some of the things that really mattered to you and your firm. And I'd say to a lot of firms, the more you can share with the vendors, the more that they can then tailor what it is they're demonstrating to you, what it is they're trying to solve for you. Because a lot of this goes beyond the demo, right?
Right.
The North Star you had, it was very much about, well, how can we improve our profitability here? Okay, well, we can show you some features that are going to automate a few things, but actually, this is more of a business strategy conversation. So let's take a step back. Let's explain how we would approach this if we were in your shoes, using our technology to try and achieve that goal. And that allowed for a more tailored conversation than your standard, oh, well, let's go through the demo motions and let's then go through a bit of a pilot. And then at the end, we'll just throw it up in the air and see which one scored the best. So what would you say to firms around how much to share in terms of trying to get the solution providers to be able to tailor their approach?
Yeah, honestly, it's exactly what you said, Mark. We wanted to be transparent with the top two folks that we did our pilots with. We said, okay, the pilots are done. We've gathered the feedback. Where do we go from here? And our CIO had said, you know what? Why don't we meet with leadership from each of the two vendors to see what their strategy is and give them our goals, a few of our goals that are driving this change, and say, what would you do? Exactly what you said. What would you do if you were in our shoes? How can your software and your solution help us achieve these goals? And that leadership conversation that we had with both of the top two contenders really hit home. One really hit home meeting with you all. You guys have a culture, Inflow has a culture and goals that are very similar to our firm. And so I would encourage any firm that once you kind of narrow down the stakes, meet with them, meet with the leadership, see if you can get a voice in the room to say, hey, We want to see what your future vision is. Here's our future vision. Do they align or do they go separate? And that was really, that conversation that we had was really eye-opening and really helped us all solidify our decision and feel good about going forward with a short period of time.
And that's I think an underrated part of this process, because all too often we focus on the tangible things that we can see and we can touch. So it's easy to get a product demo scheduled, right? It's easy to get into the tools and start playing around with them. But this is a decision you're not making lightly as something that you want to reverse in 2 years' time. Ideally, you're picking the right tool, but you're also picking the right partner to work with, because the reality here is anyone going into this thinking they're going to find the perfect tool that does everything for them, that doesn't exist.
Right.
There's going to be a need here to find somebody who is a right partner for you, to help you with your innovation journey, to listen to you. That's one of the things I've been really pleased to hear the last week or so, is firms saying, you listen. You guys actually listen, you take it away and you do something about it. And to me, that doesn't feel that aspirational in terms of like, I'm from the accounting profession. That's kind of how we work.
Yeah.
But I think the conversation you set up at the very end of the process, which is almost the, are we making the right decision here? I remember that conversation, and it was a very open and frank discussion to say, we just want to understand where you guys are going and where you guys just aren't going to go, because then that means we can start to think about, well, what does that mean for our overall technology strategy? What does it mean we need to work on ourselves? And I thought that was a really smart move for you to solidify the process. And your CIO has some great ideas. He has some quirky ideas as well. But that was one of his better ones in terms of setting up that, like, that leadership level, look into the whites of the eyes and go, right, is this the partner that we want to work with? Are these the people that we want to spend the next couple of years trying to get this change to happen with? So that's something I think you guys did really well there. And I don't see it that commonly happening, but I think it brought a lot of value to your process.
Yeah, honestly, as I mentioned, it was after those two conversations, it was eye-opening and very clear of these are the folks that we want to partner with. Those legacy systems that we were on and others are on, as you mentioned, we're all happy to just be heard. And so some of those legacy systems, you feel just like a small little number and try to get feedback where you can, the avenues that they allow you to, but it doesn't always feel that you're heard. And some of the things are, the feedback that we have are, hey, this would really make our process a lot more efficient, or this would really help us automate a lot of different things if you would just change this, or, give us some open APIs or just different things. And those are always met with, okay, thanks, but we'll do that in due time on our timeline. And so just being heard, and as I mentioned, just a partner going forward. We don't want a software or a methodology that once it's done, developed, you say, okay, that's it. Now just keep working, for the next 15 years, and maybe we'll talk about some change, along the way. But we wanted somebody that was really going to partner and say, hey, we're going to continue to update. We're going to continue to innovate. We're going to continue to do things differently. Just because the software looks away now doesn't mean that it's going to look that way or even remotely look that way in the next 5 years. And that was really exciting to us.
I think that's such an important part of this. I got asked recently, I don't think it was yourselves, I think it was somebody else asked me, and they said, when will the software be finished? And I was like, it will never be finished. That's not how modern software works. That's how old software works. It kind of gets finished and then we just milk it as a cash cow.
Right.
But for us, it's very much about, there's always innovation opportunity. And the most important source of those innovation ideas is the firms that we're working with. Our customers are the ones who are trying to get it to work in a different area or a new space, or it's kind of a client thing has happened and it works a bit differently. Those are the really important feedback points for us around how can we work with our customers and really make the product exactly what they want. So recapping then, your process, you started with requirements gathering, talking internally, thinking about dream features, thinking about exactly what it is we're looking for and what would be deal breakers. You then talked about, well, what's the process going to look like? Who's going to be involved? How much time are we going to expect them to be involved? When are we going to make a decision? How are we going to make a decision? You've then done demos, evaluated the market, seen what's out there to make sure that you've got a viable path forward. You created some science in there, some scoring to be able to narrow it from 6 to 2. We've then done simulations with those 2. We've gone a lot deeper. We've put 6 different clients in there, each of the tools, work them through, again, put some scoring behind that, some evaluation to give us some clear criteria. And then as the final kind of piece of the puzzle, set up some leadership level conversations with those two different solutions providers to be able to get a feel for, okay, based on where the products are today, we also want to understand where the products are going to be tomorrow and in the future and what it's going to look like to work with these people. That's basically your process. And at the end of it, you've then been comfortable as a group making decision proceeding. Did I miss anything there, Katie, in terms of how you promote, how you approach this?
No, Mark, that's exactly what we did. Once we had the leadership meetings, we again met back in person for a day, and said, hey, this is what we gathered for feedback. And in the first 30 minutes, we had blocked an entire 8-hour day. In the first 30 minutes, we did an exercise of everybody walk to this side of the room or this side of the room. This side of the room is one vendor, our choice. This side of the room is the other vendor, our choice. Which side of the room do you want to go to? And everybody went to one side of the room.
But it was unanimous.
It was unanimous in the first 30 minutes of an 8-hour day. And we thought, well, guys, when we set out the meeting, we thought, well, maybe we'll have a decision by, maybe after lunch or, by hour 6.
Was
and
this
then
like a jury process that you were expecting?
practically, yeah. And so, we had set aside the whole day. And then in the first 30 minutes, I mean, like I said, it was unanimous. Kind of after that leadership conversation that we had with you all, it was very clear who we wanted to partner with. And so it really hit home that we're all in this together and we all can see the value in partnering with you all. And so, like I say, in the first 30 minutes, we had a decision. The rest of the day, we talked about what's our timeline now? What is our timeline for implementation? What is our timeline for rollout? What does our peer review cycle look like? Like all of those things, we had the entire rest of the day to figure those things out.
Well, that's fantastic. And I know we're really pleased to be working with you. We think there's a great fit between our business and your firm. And that for us is really important. As part of this process, we want to be working with the right firms, not necessarily every firm out there. And so Pinion, a fantastic firm that's going to be doing some really exciting things. I love, though, that you then started to immediately use that time to start thinking about the change management. So there's so much to that, but you touched on peer review specifically there. And I know that going into this process, peer review was something that you were mindful, well, where do we want this change to happen in relation to our peer review cycle? We've got, the triennial cycle. When do we want that to happen? How do we think about that? So you changed your mind, though, during that process. You were originally thinking on one timetable. You then switched and brought that forward. So would you mind touching on that a little bit? Because I think a lot of firms see peer review as being a really key milestone in terms of when and how they approach changing their audit methodology and their audit technology.
Certainly. It really was something that obviously is at the forefront of everybody's mind in the audit department. You live or die, by peer review. And so our initial thought was, well, let's wait around for the next cycle to happen so we're not implementing during a peer review year. We also explored changing methodologies. Is that a reason to try to push your peer review? And ultimately decided, you know what? We can't wait around on this decision, and we trust our folks. We trust our teams. If we set out a good process and good templates and all of those things, when we roll this out, we will have a quality product and we will be confident that we will still pass our peer review. We also reached out directly to our peer reviewers after we had kind of talked about the timeline of, hey, we think we want to do this now during our peer review year. What do you guys think? Are you familiar with Inflow, or are you familiar, do you have other clients on that particular software? And they really partnered with us and said, you know what? We don't see any issue with that. We think that, if this is in your guys, in the firm's goals and aligns with what you all want to do solid training, set up solid processes, and you'll be just fine.
And I think that's so important here, because what we don't want to be doing is delaying the success and the improvement in quality that a new, more modern audit methodology and technology inherently offers.
Right.
For the fear of the quality inspections of peer review. It kind of feels counterintuitive to the whole essence of what peer review is all about, to say, well, actually, we're going to do 1 or 2 more years on our really old dated way of doing things because we're worried about our quality results, when actually making that change, you're changing in your peer review year.
Right.
But you're changing the audit methodology because you want to improve audit quality as one of the drivers here. And so for me, you've got to lean into that. And I love the fact that you've engaged with your peer reviewer. We've actually seen some firms who are maybe 1 year out from their peer review actually asking their peer reviewer to do like a handful of their new engagements in that first cycle, so they can take the learnings of those first engagements and then apply them really quickly ahead of their true full peer review cycle. So there's lots of different ways to approach this. Another one that I really like is the first 5 or so engagements you put through the platform, whether it's just for planning or whether it's the fieldwork phase as well. Have those teams do like a really detailed debrief or an after action report, as I like to talk about, with your quality team internally, or just, a different partner who's really keen on quality, and try and get those learnings from those first 5 audits as quickly as possible shared with the rest of the teams. So you're not waiting for everybody to have their first go for them to learn the mistakes, the things that they could have done better, etc. So really just focusing on, well, how do we involve the peer reviewer? How do we think differently about the 3-year cycle? How do we think differently around how we learn those quality improvements quickly, is a really smart approach to make sure that peer review doesn't become the excuse to delay for 1, 2, 3 years, and a change that needs to happen quite quickly here.
Yeah. And honestly, Mark, what we did too was the first few audits and projects that we issued out of the product, we had folks use a peer review checklist. Another outside partner who wasn't involved in the project go through a peer review checklist and do some of those quality reviews on our issued projects to say, is there anything we're missing? And so we had no issues whatsoever on what we were doing. We made little tweaks and, disseminated that information out to the rest of the team. But honestly, that really helped give us some more comfort once we did roll things out firm wide to say, nope, I think we've marked all the boxes. We've worked out all of the kinks, got our own internal processes set, templates made, all of those things. So when we roll it out firm wide, we really do have trust and can sleep at night knowing that we'll be just fine.
We could spend a whole podcast just talking about change management, so I'll keep it brief. What would be 2 or 3 of your tips for other firms on, once you've made the decision, starting to think about that post-decision but pre-implementation period of change management? Have you done anything that really stands out for you as being something that was successful, or a tip that others should be thinking about?
Yeah, I would say one is communication with the entire function to say, hey, early on, we let folks know a team of us are meeting. We are looking at new softwares. We are looking at new methodologies. We didn't give them any more details than that, but just saying, hey, we don't want there to be chatter. We don't want there to be gossip. This is what we're doing. We are going to move forward with something different, and we're just letting you know. So communicating often. Also communicating the why. Hey guys, right now we set forward and decided we think we're doing too many checklists. We think, that things the way that we're doing things right now is a little bit antiquated. We want to do things differently. So again, communicating that why of why we're doing this. It might seem onerous, but in the end, we will all be happier. We will all have happy clients. And so communicating often, communicating the why. And then the other thing that we had the luxury of doing was doing some what we call early adopter engagements. And so again, once we started this process, we met last August and finished up our pilots, and then met in November to make our decision. We decided next month, let's start. So in a month, last December, we had decided we're going to put some early adopter engagements through the software. And what the purpose of that was, again, is to ask all of those questions. We met with folks from from Inflow weekly and said, hey, these are our questions. Where do I check this box? Where do I see this thing? How do I make this analytics work for me? And we really worked out all of those kinks on those about 30 early adopter engagements that we did during busy season. So that way, again, once we rolled it out firm wide and everybody raised their hand during training and said, where's the template for that? Or how do I do this? How do I map some different things? We said already, here's a resource. Here's a guide. Here's what Inflow's got. Here's Inflow Know. Here's the templates that Inflow has made. We've combed through all of those things already. So firm-wide rollout was hugely successful because we've done all of those things with a smaller group of us.
I love how successful the implementation's been, because you've been so intentional around how you've gone about this, and you've collaborated so closely with us. You've really leaned on us, the weekly office hours, hey, where do I get this thing? Is this something I need to create myself? Is this something I need to think about? There's loads of different things we can do there. but it only works if we're collaborating and working together on it. So it becomes that partnership to be able to go, right, well, your success is our success. Right. If you don't get this to work, it's ultimately useless as a piece of technology. And so the tips you shared there, I think, are fantastic. Those people on the early adopter engagements have become fantastic champions for the rest of the business. They're just one step ahead of everybody else. They're looking at the more progressive capabilities. How does the data analytics work? How does this fit into the process? So all of that just really sets you up for success, but it's because you've been very intentional about how you've done it. And I also like the agility you've shown. You've not looked at this as being one big bang implementation. You've gone, right, we can get started next month getting some engagements going if we've got the right people involved, if we've got the right intentions around those engagements. So I think there's a lot there for people to unpack. And as I say, we could spend forever talking about how to go about change management, but those are some really insightful tips, Katie. Thank you very much for sharing those.
For sure.
This has been a really interesting conversation. I really appreciate how open and transparent you've been with everyone, sharing your process, sharing how to follow a methodology to select a methodology. And this has been something that I think has been packed with insights for people to take away and go and run their own process, find the right solution for them. But importantly, go to the end of that process confident that they've picked the right thing for their firm. So thank you very much for sharing all that, Katie.
Of course. Thanks, Mark. Happy to be here.